Raccoon City, one of the most well-known and iconic locations within the Resident Evil franchise, and one of my personal favorites, as I ranked it high up on my top 10 list of favorite Resident Evil locations. And with it being September 28th as I record this, I thought, why not make a video talking about Raccoon City and just all the things that I really loved about it. And so here we are. Let's go ahead and make this video talking about all the things that I love about Raccoon City and that era of Resident Evil. So the first really big thing that I love about Raccoon City is how unique it is, and that we never really see anything else like it afterwards. You know, we do have outbreaks that happen in Resident Evil after Raccoon City, but we don't have anything like Raccoon exactly. Because during this incident, even our main characters have no idea how to really handle this. They're simply just trying to survive and escape the city. And so it's all new to them as well. Leon is a rookie cop, Claire is just a college student, and Jill has some experience from the Spencer Mansion, but she's still no expert at this. And unlike the Spencer Mansion, she's now being hunted down by a super tyrant that goes by the name of Nemesis. And so nobody really has any true experience and doesn't really know how to handle any of the situations that they're in during the Raccoon City incident. And so I really like that. It's a cool concept that we never see again, because other outbreaks like Tall Oaks, for example, Leon is an expert at this point. He knows how to handle zombies and BOWs and all this other stuff, and so Tall Oaks isn't really a huge issue for him specifically. He knows what he's doing. And even somebody like Helena, who this is her first game that she's ever been in, she even has experience because of all the training that she's been able to do. You know, nobody had training during Raccoon because that was the first time anything like that ever happened. But after Raccoon, the government was able to train people up properly and be prepared for something like that. So even somebody like Helena could be prepared for an outbreak so she could handle herself in that sort of situation. And so that's what I love about Raccoon City, is how just unique it is in that regard. Not even the main characters were prepared for it and knew how to truly handle it yet. So it's really cool in that regard as to how it, all happens. And as we all know, Raccoon City gets infected because on September 23rd, Umbrella sends out their USS Alpha team to go get the G-Virus samples and take in William Birkin. But one of the members gets a little nervous when some supplies falls off a desk as they confront William Birkin, and so he guns down William Birkin, nearly killing him. And so they have no choice but to only take the G-Virus samples and leave William Birkin to die. That's when William Birkin injects the G-Virus into his body. He mutates into G, and then he hunts them down in the sewers, kills them all except for Hunk. And from that, the T-Virus is able to leak out. The rats get infected, the water system gets infected, and then by the time Resident Evil 8 or Resident Evil 3 starts on September 28th, there's a huge viral outbreak going on. The vast majority of the city is full of zombies and other mutated creatures. And I love that. It's so cool because it's basically taking the Spencer Mansion and multiplying it by like 100. In the Spencer Mansion, you had zombies, you had hunters, giant snakes, sharks, plant monsters, all these things. But it was all confined in one mansion. It wasn't that big of a deal. It was just one mansion. Yeah, there was a couple of zombie dogs out in the woods, but the vast majority of it was in the mansion and a few other little places. But that was it. Raccoon City is a city that holds 100,000 people, and most of them are now zombies. That's huge. Like, that is huge compared to what Resident Evil 1 was with the Spencer Mansion. And so seeing this is just such a cool level up from the first game, and just to see like all the chaos that unfolds. Now, our first real look at Raccoon City is of course in Resident Evil 2 when Leon and Claire show up, and I'll be addressing the original RE2 and 3 for the most part because that's the version that I prefer. I think those two games showcase Raccoon City better than the remakes did. I think it felt more alive and was just better explained and given more life in the originals. And so that's just the version that I'll be talking about for the most part, but we will say a few things in regards to the remakes. But Leon shows up and he sees that body lying on the ground. Soon after that, zombies show up and he starts to try to take them out. Claire shows up, she goes into a diner, and then she sees like the cook or whoever munching on another dead body, and then it comes at her and zombies are all over the place. And that's when she and Leon eventually meet up. They try to head to the police department, but have to split up when an 18-wheeler crashes into their vehicle and they had to jump out opposite directions. And depending on who you play as, you'll go through a bunch of back alleys and stuff like that, and you'll either get straight to the police department or you'll get to Kendo's gun shop. And so that's about the extent of Resident Evil 2 as far as the city itself. After that, you'll spend the majority of your time in the police department, and then later on the sewer and in the Umbrella Lab. But it's a really cool concept, you know. Being a part of the police station is cool because it's like you get to see this location that's like supposed to be the safest place in Raccoon City that's left, and even it's falling apart because there's nobody there except for one injured cop, Marvin, and an insane police chief, Chief Brian Irons, and that's about all you got going for you at the police department. So it is pretty cool though to explore that. But it's Resident Evil 3 that really kicks off truly seeing the city as a whole, because that game you really get to explore all kinds of angles of Resident Evil's Raccoon City. You know, you'll go to places like the diner where you'll meet Carlos. You've got a park that you'll go to. You'll eventually go into like a hospital. You'll explore throughout the clock tower, all kinds of little areas. I think you even go to like a gas station or something. I mean, there's just so many different areas that you go to in Resident Evil 3, and it really brings forth the city alive. Like, it really showcases this city in such a way. Like, this outbreak is massive, and so I really like that. It's really cool to explore the city and just see how much it's fallen into chaos from this viral outbreak. I just love that. I also love seeing like all of the civilians that you will run into throughout both RE2 and RE3, such as Ben, the reporter. You'll see him, and he locks himself up in the cell and wants to stay there until someone like the National Guard can come and save everybody. He wants to stay behind the bars because he thinks that's the safest. Now in the remake, he gets locked up by Brian Irons and begs Leon to help get him out, so they kind of changed that part up a little bit. But regardless, I just think it's cool how you meet him. He tells you about the sewers, and that's how Ada and Leon eventually find the lab and everything like that. And so it's a pretty cool little thing there. And then you have Resident Evil 3's Dario, who basically loses his mind after his daughter's death and pretty much seals himself up in confinement. He won't follow Jill. He doesn't attempt to leave the city, nothing. And he eventually falls with the city. You know, you can go back in the original and you can see his dead body. In the remake, they didn't add that. Kind of annoying, but it is what it is. But yeah, just the different like little situations like that where you see the civilians and like how they're reacting to this is just such a cool concept in you know, the Raccoon City era. Because something like Tall Oaks never did anything like that. You did have that one segment where you did have the survivors that you worked with, like the police officer and the gun shop owner and the bus driver and everything like that, but it wasn't in the same angle or the same level. They were just kind of there. I don't even think you learn any of their names or anything. They're just there, and they eventually die when the bus crashes, and that's it. Or sooner if you don't like save some of them. And that was it. But in Resident Evil, or in Raccoon City rather, you just get to learn a bit of these characters and how they're reacting. You know, you also have characters like the police chief Brian Irons, who's just this insane maniac to begin with, because you learn who he is through the secretary's diaries and stuff. Like, he's not a good guy. You also can get that fax in the STARS office that explains how insane this dude is. And we learn more about him as the game progresses. You know, I like how in the original you go in there and he kind of tries to come off as this good, concerned cop. He's all depressed about what's happening, how he failed to protect the mayor's daughter, even though he actually hunted her down himself. And then later on, you get into his little chamber, he really does show how insane he is. He was going to taxidermy the mayor's daughter. He was going to hunt down anyone, that tried to escape the city. He sabotaged so many different things. He took the guns and the ammunition in the police department and scattered them around so it'd be more difficult for the officers. He did so many crazy things, and then I think it's just an interesting character. And then you have in Resident Evil 3 Nikolai, who kind of plays a similar role to Irons, but more so to Wesker in the first game, where he's basically setting up his guys as research tools, and is going to sell the data to a competitor to Umbrella. And I think it's a cool concept. I like seeing all the reactions that you have with them. Carlos is a cool little partner that Jill will run into, sort of like a Barry in the first game. It's just a cool concept, and I really do like it. And then, like I said, Raccoon City, even after its destruction at the end of Resident Evil 3, still has a huge impact to the series as a whole, because the survivors, they all have their huge roles. Leon eventually goes on to become a government agent, and he'll do things like save Ashley in Resident Evil 4, and then he'll do all the things that he did in the CG movies like Degeneration, Damnation, and Vendetta. And then of course he does what he does in Resident Evil 6, and so he has all that going for him. And then you have Sherry. She'll eventually be tested on and everything like that, but later on become an agent herself. Jill, when she gets infected with the T virus and Carlos gets the antidote for her, she gets antibodies, and that becomes the key to Ouroboros. 2 games later in Resident Evil 5, we come back to that moment, that minor moment where you think she just gets infected and then she gets the antidote and it's all over. No, we come back to that in 5, and it's like, oh yeah, that actually sets up the key ingredient to perfecting Ouroboros, which is what Wesker is creating to create a new world, his new Genesis, as he puts it. And that's pretty cool how we come back to that from Jill getting infected. Or Derek Simmons is another connection to the city, where he didn't want to release the truth about Raccoon City to the general public because he wanted to maintain his position of power, and he wanted to keep the current flow of order intact. He didn't want anything to fall apart, and so he sabotaged everything with Tall Oaks and made sure that the truth didn't come out. And so I think that's cool how it comes back to that, So there's so many different connections with Raccoon City. Even after it's destroyed, it still plays such a massive role to the series as a whole, and that's really why I love it. It's just such a iconic and massive part of the franchise. It holds 2 of the best games, 2 and 3, and even if you're a fan of the Outbreak series, you get to explore that even more so as you play as a couple other people trying to survive. And so Resident Evil, the Raccoon City era, it's just Resident Evil in its most pure form, and that's why I love it. And so I just want to make a video talking about it because it's just so cool to explore the city. I just wish the remakes would have capitalized on it more so and truly captured the essence of the originals and did more, especially RE3, because that's the game that you explore the city in. That's the game that you're actually going throughout the city and seeing all these things. I would have loved for them to have not cut any content, keep the clock tower, keep all the other little areas that you cut out, and then add more areas. Add other areas that Claire or Jill will go to and things like that. Have Jill go to the police station still. There's no reason to cut that out. There's no reason to not have that. They should have capitalized on it and truly improved on it and made it bigger than it was in the original, and they never did that, and I think it's a shame. But regardless, I still love the original. I still love RE2 original, RE3. They're just great games. Raccoon City is still by far one of the coolest and most iconic locations in Resident Evil, and it's because of the impact that it has on the series as a whole, both when it was in its prime during the first trilogy and even afterwards, because of the massive impact that it has. But that's all I have for this video. Just wanted to talk about it and, you know, just tell why I love the city era of, you know, Resident Evil. And so that's all I have for this video. So I'll go ahead and end it here, and I'll see you all on the next one. See you then.